So if this was your placard today, I wonder what you'd write on it. There's loads in the news about protesting at the moment, isn't there? Rightly. For those of us who enjoy power and privilege, maybe some of it's confusing. Maybe we're at a loss as to know how to support things that we feel strongly about ourselves. Maybe we struggle to find a voice. Maybe the placard's blank at the moment and we wonder what to write. Protest. Well, we're looking at the book of Lamentations today. It's often ascribed to Jeremiah because, as we saw yesterday, there's lamentation in Jeremiah, particularly in that first section up to 23, verse 8. We get lots of lamentation by Jeremiah. But Lamentations is different altogether. At the beginning, we get these famous words, "How lonely sits the city." And Lamentations isn't just one voice, often it's a whole community of voices. It's corporate lament. And when there is just one voice, it's not the voice of a man. No, quite amazingly and interestingly, given the time in which it's set, the voice we have is of a woman, near death, abandoned, crying out to God, daring to address the creator of heaven and earth and laying out her cry in protest that this is how things are, this is surely not how things should be. But it's certainly set around the time of Jeremiah and it marks the destruction of Jerusalem, as we know, finally obliterated in 587, as everything that was distinctive about this precious prized possession of God's people is destroyed. And they are led away into captivity, into Babylon, and everything about them lies in ruins, their monarchy, their temple. How could it be? Where is God in all of this? There's a powerful connection between Lamentations and 2 Kings chapter 25. Actually, there are 11 historical happenings there in chapter 25 of 2 Kings that also appear in Lamentations as well. As 2 Kings records the desolation, well, Lamentations gives it voice. And we get to hear about what it's like from the inside. And Lamentations is the fifth of those 5 scrolls, along with Esther and Ecclesiastes and Song of Songs and Ruth, that are linked to particular times of festival and of worship in the Jewish calendar. And this one, of course, no surprise, is linked to the annual fast at which the destruction of Jerusalem is remembered. There's a depth of suffering here which is voiced but not explained away, not kind of responded to even, but just left hanging. And it's beautifully ordered. It's relentlessly focused, even around the structure of the book. Look carefully, and you'll see that chapters 1, 2, 4, and 5 consist of 22 verses. You'll know that there are 22 letters in the Hebrew alphabet. And certainly for 1, 2, and 4, those chapters, each verse begins with each of those letters in turn. It's like an A to Z in our letters of suffering. Chapter 3, you'll see, is 66 verses, and there each letter has 3 verses as it explores suffering. And the 5th chapter isn't an acrostic, doesn't work through the letters of the alphabet in order, but it's still 22 verses, 22 lines in the original, and it kind of links to what's there in the other chapters as well. So all of it ordered, suffering and protests, given this intense focus as it's shaped in this beautiful way. I mentioned the beginning, how lonely sits the city. Many people prize Lamentations because of what's there in the middle, in verse 22 onwards of chapter 3. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies are new every morning. Great is thy faithfulness. But that almost explains the message of Lamentations away too easily. And instead, I invite you to stick with the book and journey to the end. And there, in those final verses, is an altogether different ending. It begins there at the end of chapter 5, verse 19, by praising God. You reign forever. But then there is a questioning. Why? Why has this happened? Though it's linked to Israel's sin, there is injustice. Individuals are suffering injustice. How does this work, Lord? Why? And then there is a prayer, remember us, O Lord. But it also ends with a kind of question. It ends open ended, unless, of course, you've rejected us forever. It puts the ball back firmly in God's court. It's not despair. No, this suffering is so intense, this process is so deep that despair has been given voice. It's almost emptied out, and there is an openness to receiving hope, openness to receiving a new beginning. It's not a cry of despair, not at all, because if it was despair, there'd be no point protesting. But it is a praise, it is a questioning, it is a prayer, but it's also a giving over to God and waiting for Him to respond, unless you've abandoned us forever. Maybe that's an ending that rings more true, if that's a phrase, that rings truer with human suffering. Not to quickly explain it away, not to too quickly try and put it in its place, but to leave it hanging. And what Lamentations does, as well as leaving it hanging, is gives it voice. Through the structure, through the words, everything is articulated. There is protest, there is questioning, there is petition as well as praise, and the ball is put back firmly in God's court. So Lamentations then helps us to find a place for protest. It helps us to find a place for bottoming out despair by orientating it to God. Not because we've given up on God or because He's given up on us, but in the depths of the suffering to find a way of orientating ourselves and to ask God to orientate Himself back to us. For that's where we might find hope. So if we're given a pen and a blank placard, what do we need to write on it today as we lament and as we protest? And do we dare to have enough faith in God to be able to do that? Are we secure enough in who He is? Are we secure enough in our relationship with Him to dare to speak the truth of our experience and to long for Him to intervene and to change things? That woman, as she's dying in the middle of the city, has that courage. And she invites us to take up the pen and to join her in protesting with all those who, like her, are in need of God's deliverance this day. The Lord's mercies are new every morning, so let's dare to claim them for ourselves and for all those who need to know the reality of that truth in their own experience.